Welcome back to Transforming Lives with Prophetess Rein Wallace. I am your host, Prophetess Rein, and this is Say Something Saturday. I want to thank you for tuning in. If you are new to the channel, we have 3 segments. You don't have to wait till Saturday. On Mondays, we deal with authentic worship, where we dissect many of the things that we do in worship, and we talk about why we do them, why we say them. Are they accurate? Are they not? Should we continue in those practices or should we not? Then we have Help Me Stand Wednesdays. This is where you get to send me your questions about things that you are going through, things that are related to the faith walk process, for us to dissect, pray about, and hopefully give you some answers to in that segment to do what? Help you stand. Well, you're here on a Saturday for Say Something Saturdays, and this is a part of a global campaign that is worldwide, from the United States to Africa to Europe, where we are taking transformation to the nations. It is all about transforming trauma, and this is a campaign that is near and dear to my heart, and I hope that you will join me at my website, which will be listed below, where you can find out more about the Say Something campaign and how you can be a part of helping us take transformation to the nations. It's time for us to heal from our pain. So today, we're here to talk about why don't people tell? If you've been watching the news, if you've been following the story around Judge Kavanaugh or Bill Cosby or many of the other issues that have come up around particularly sexual harassment, sexual abuse, if you've been watching that, there's a consistent question that comes up that says, that asks, why don't they tell? Why did they wait? Why didn't they say something? Why didn't they tell their parents? Why? And often this is spoken by people who have never gone through it. This is spoken by people who have never had to overcome any form of sexual abuse or even physical abuse for that matter. And so they're asking that question, usually out of ignorance. Now, that doesn't mean that's true for everybody. Some people are asking that question because they legitimately want to know, why on earth would you wait? And if you think about it, the question isn't necessarily in itself a bad question. If somebody's being abused, you would want to know, why wouldn't you tell, right? Well, I'll give you an example using myself. I am one who was sexually abused from the time that I was 4 until I was about 13 years old. And I can tell you there are a lot of reasons that we don't tell, especially considering that we are often, as women in particular, and even as men, I will say that, we're often beat up for coming forward. So that's one reason we don't tell. When people, when you find the courage to tell your truth, and someone then comes behind you and says, well, you should have did, it doesn't make it easy. Those that are experiencing any sort of a trauma in this way are watching, and they're triggered by that. And so they don't necessarily perceive that they are going to be believed. Maybe they think they've waited too late. I don't know. In my situation, particularly in my adolescence, I had several sexual abusers. It became a normal part of my life. They say, from a scientific perspective, that everything we believe about love, everything we believe about life, everything we believe about who we are is programmed into us by the time we are 5 years old. So if you're being abused during that time, then you can only imagine what a person might feel about themselves or their relationship to the world or how they perceive they are supposed to be treated. Being one who had sexual abuse, start through the prostitution by my grandmother at just a toddler, who walked me into what was known back then as, excuse my language, a whorehouse, and allowed multiple men to rape me. That's trauma. You are traumatized. You are paralyzed. How would I have known to say something? This is my grandmother who walked me into that situation. Okay, this is not a situation where this is a stranger. And even if it were, often when you're a kid, there are things that predators are saying to you that make it really uncomfortable for you to share. For example, when I was being molested by my stepfather, one of the consistent speeches was, well, you don't want to say anything because, this is a family and we're a family and I would never do anything to hurt you. And, you don't want to ruin the marriage. You want to make sure that the family can stay together. And so that's a lot of weight for particularly a child to have to carry. And we're saying, well, you should have said something. There were many opportunities that I had to say something, but when you're being convinced that your voice will be destructive, when you're being convinced that if you say something, there's going to be some great punishment or some great hell for you on the other side, that's not exactly encouraging. And if you don't live in an environment where communication is fostered, then you have another layer as to why you might not talk. And so I meet with parents all the time who have children that have been in this situation, or, people that I talk to who are victims, who say to me that they have relatives that are angry with them, or one of the consistent things that is said is, well, you must have liked it. It must not have been that bad. It must not have bothered you that much because you could have said something. I would have done. But the reality is, a victim doesn't know in a moment of victimization who's really going to be there or who's not. If I grew up with my grandmother prostituting me, how was I supposed to believe that telling her that my stepfather was now molesting me was going to help me? And if she's consistently programming into my mind that nobody cares about me, that I am a burden, okay, in my situation, which is true for a lot of people, how am I supposed to trust? If the person that is violating me was someone that I loved and trusted, and usually it is, how then does a child or a teenager feel comfortable trusting someone enough to tell? Then there is the element of, is anybody going to believe me? Is anybody going to believe me? When I was raped at 14 years old, I believed it was my fault. I didn't have an understanding of no means no. I didn't have that. I thought at that time I was ready to lose my virginity. And I changed my mind when it came down to it, because I realized now this is a little more scary. I suddenly got scared of pregnancy. I just had all these thoughts. What if my mother walks through the door? What if I'm caught? And I decided this is not going to be a good idea. I'm sorry that I brought you here. I'm really not ready for this. And I found myself pinned down, okay, in a situation that was very helpless for me. And because I had been molested prior to, what did I learn to do? Acquiesce. Because this is life. No matter how you cry out, no matter what symptoms you display, nobody sees you, nobody's watching, nobody cares, nobody's protecting you. Come on. This is a long-term series of sexual abuse for me. So I took it. I perceived that this must be what I deserved, because that is what my grandmother taught me. That is what my stepfather taught me by violating me. So I perceived that this is just life. And then there was the added guilt. If I hadn't set myself up, if I had made a different decision, maybe this would not have happened. That is probably 99.9% true. I can't guarantee I never would have been raped in any other way. Life is life. We can't predict life. But I beat myself up. And I understand victims who do the same thing. I understand victims who are so programmed to believe that this is life, that there's no point in talking. And then there are those that are so burdened and so pained by the sexual abuse that they shut down. They retreat. They don't want to talk about it. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to talk about being raped. I was 14 and in high school. And all I could hear is, if I say something to my mom, I'm going to get in trouble because I never should have had a boy in the house in the first place. She's probably going to tell me, not that this was her, but in my mind, I'm thinking she's probably going to tell me, this is what you get. If you hadn't disobeyed me, this wouldn't have happened. I didn't want to hear that. It was bad enough that was my first experience with sex outside of all of the other molestation. Okay. It was bad enough that I had to deal with that experience. It was bad enough that I was being violated at what I perceived by my own fault. There was just nothing to talk about. And the only reason that I ended up talking about any or all of it is because a few months later, I discovered that I was pregnant. Now what? Somebody's got to know. I can't just hide a pregnancy. Here it is. I'm pregnant from rape. Now I really have to talk, and that was painful. Because when I did talk, when I started sharing that this is how I ended up in the situation, exactly what I feared happened. There were people who said to me that I trusted and I loved. Oh, I didn't think you were that kind of girl. Gee, thanks. Gee, thank you. Thank you for pointing that out at a very critical and sensitive time in my life. I'm coming to you for help. There were people who were angry. Well, you never should have put yourself in that position. You never should have done that. So here I was. Yes, in this particular sense, a victim of my own doing, but also decided because of previous mentality from previous sexual abuse that nobody was dealing with, that nobody was talking about, that nobody was protecting me from. Okay, because I can't say that I didn't display some signs, the fear, the withdrawal. I mean, if you study some of the signs and the symptoms, there are certain things that you can see, but nobody was paying attention to me. Everybody was caught up in their own life. So I suffered silently. I stayed in my room. I became very withdrawn. I stayed to myself. So I learned to be quiet, but I also learned a behavior that this is love. That this is what love is, being abused and being a victim. And this isn't true for everyone. I'm just giving you some perspective. We can't possibly cover in a short segment why people don't talk. But I know why I didn't. Because I had a lot of guilt. I had a lot of anger. I had a lot just built up. But I also had very poor, very low self-esteem. And when you're living in victim mentality, it's not easy to talk about. It's not, sometimes you don't even want to relive it. When you are so violated, sometimes it takes months for people who actually do seek out counseling to sit in that room with a complete stranger and feel comfortable enough to talk about what actually happened. And having to talk about it meant having to relive it. So yes, to talk about it, I'm at a place where I'm really messed up because I've been raped, and you're now telling me I'm 3 months pregnant as a result of that. Having to talk about it, yes, it all came pouring out because I had been holding it in, but I had to relive that. I had to relive my grandmother getting me dressed up on a day that wasn't a Sunday, rarely took me anywhere, putting makeup on my face, taking me to a whorehouse, that smelly hallway, that disgusting room with all of those men walking in there to rape me one by one, and sometimes in group sessions. That's what I dealt with. Who wants to remember that? That's not easy to talk about until you get to a place of being healed from it, until you get to a place of getting the help and the environment that is safe enough for you to be able to deal with what really happened. It's never easy for me to recall the many times that I was in my bedroom, praying and begging God, please don't let my stepfather come in here tonight. Or the times that I spent hiding in a closet with my little sister who was an infant, trying to shield her from being molested, throwing myself in the way, saying, you know what, take me, just don't touch my sister. Times that we spend crying in our bed at night. These are things that are not easy to talk about. You don't even know where to start. The violation of molestation, the violation of rape, the violation of these kinds of traumas is so deep that we are not always in a position to tell. And so those of us that are the loved ones of those that have endured a trauma, if you're watching this and maybe you have a child that's gone through it, or you suspect it, or you know somebody that has been through it, cut them a break. Because until you've lived on this side, until you've actually had to walk something like this out, until you have to look your children in the face and talk about what happened to you by somebody that they love, that might be their uncle or their grandfather, that's not easy. This is a conversation that is ongoing, and healing takes time. Finding the courage to speak up takes time. Not everybody is Wonder Woman or Superman. Especially for men who are very internal. I can only imagine what it feels like for a man to be sexually abused and have to talk about it. So it's not always that easy. And so we say, well, they shouldn't have waited years. Sometimes it takes years to even face the fact that it happened. There are people who are on medication for anxiety. There are people who cannot walk down the street without fear of being accosted. Even for myself, there are things that I pray my way through. Even in relationships, for a very long time, a man could not come up from behind me and hug me because that was a reminder of how molestation started. There are a lot of triggers and a lot of things that happen in the heart and the mind and the soul of a person who has been violated. But when they find the courage to speak, the last thing we should do is judge them. The last thing we should do is beat them up. Do I know that there are those that will lie and make up a story? Of course I do. We're not talking about them. We're talking about those that have legitimately been violated. The last thing we want to do is add insult to injury. Somebody's watching me now. I can feel you. You have a child. And this has come out, and maybe you're feeling guilty. You're feeling some type of way because in your heart, you feel like if I had known, I would have done something. Listen, you didn't know. So you've got to stop beating yourself up and don't let yourself be bitter and angry with the person who was violated because they didn't tell you or couldn't tell you at a time when you needed them to. Maybe you're a part of a family and you're watching me. And maybe you perceive, no, this person, I just don't know them to be that. Listen, what reason would any victim have to lie? With such a painful thing like that, and this is one of the reasons we don't talk, is because we're not sure, depending on the relationship that we have with these people, that anybody's going to believe us. I struggled to believe anyone was going to believe me. And catch this, as a kid, going through it, particularly with my stepfather, I had a younger brother and sister. And I was so afraid that if I said something because of what he told me, that they were going to lose their father. And I didn't want to be responsible for that. So I sucked it up. So I took it in. So I put myself in the way. So my sister would never have to go through it. You never know the journey that someone has been through. And the only question we should be asking when a person has been violated is, what can I do to help you? How can I be of support to you to make sure that you get the assistance that you need? How are you feeling? What can we do today to help you get to a healthy place in your consciousness, a healthy place in relationships? Some of you that are watching this broadcast, you have been through what I've been through. And maybe you haven't found the courage to say something yet because you are afraid, because there are many things that are attached to your saying something. Can I help you? As painful as it may be, there is nothing more liberating than the truth. And I would rather see you liberate yourself and walk in truth, whether you go see a private counselor or you confront your abuser or you say something to your family member, whatever the case may be, however you are led to let it out. I would rather see you live in liberty than to spend years like I did and so many others trying to hold things in and trying to pretend to be okay when you're not. It affects the way you parent your children. It affects who you become as a wife or a husband. It affects who we are as leaders in the pulpit. It affects who we are as parishioners in the church. It affects how we see God. It affects every part of our lives. There is no part of my life that I can think of where sexual abuse and trauma did not affect me, even on my job. If there were men who were not respectful of me, it triggered that lack of respect for who I am, and it made me feel very violated. And so I demonized and monsterized people because of what I had been through. It stifled me. I had children at a young age, and I had boys at that, and I didn't really know how to let go and love them to the intensity that they deserve, because I was always afraid that if I let them go somewhere, somebody's gonna molest them. Afraid to be vulnerable. So when you don't deal with it, when you don't say something, when we don't open our mouths, yes, we continue to live the trauma. It's always following us. Something will always trigger us. And so I want to encourage you to try to find the courage, try to find some safe space to talk about what you have been through so that you can begin the internal healing, the process of internal healing. And for those of us that are loved ones, for those of us that are sitting on the outside looking in, for those of us that need to have an opinion, suspend your opinion and just let the person be. Suspend your opinion and just pray for them. Suspend your opinion and just ask God to be God. Yes, we have a lot of questions, but until a person finishes the cycle of healing, many of those questions can't be answered. And that was one of the things that was very hard for me, was trying to articulate, why didn't you say something? I felt so much more violated when that question was asked. And I wanted to say, why didn't I say something? Why weren't you watching me? Why weren't you available for me to talk to? Where were you when I was going through this? So don't sit here and ask me why I didn't say something. Just appreciate that I'm saying something right now. Let's heal right now. And when I get to a place of the transformation being complete, when the trauma is transformed, then maybe we can go back and we can revisit. And another thing we must not do, and I'm hoping that I'm talking to a family member, somebody with an opinion that I can help to change your perspective. It's not about you. It's not about you. You might feel guilty. As a parent, I would be mortified if any of my children had to go through what I did. But it's not about you. It's about, in that moment, what the person who has experienced the assault needs. And the best thing we can do, if we couldn't be for them then, is be there for them now. That's the best thing we can do. If they need a conversation, if they need to cry, if they need a resource, that's the best thing we can do. If we want people to say something, which is why we have launched this whole campaign, we've got to create the spaces, the environments where we can talk about these things. I encourage leaders that are watching me, create a safe space where victims of abuse can come. You know, yes, there are groups outside of the church, but why can't we heal them inside the church? If this is where we spend most of our time, if we talk about God as a healer, why can't we create the spaces where people who have gone through this can come together, support one another, talk about what they've been through, and help each other heal? If we have to bring somebody from the outside into our church communities, we don't want them getting the mic and testifying about it. It goes viral and we talk about how out of order that they were, but when is the place? Where's the place? When's the time? Why can't we create that space and that opportunity? And if you're a leader watching, join me in this global Say Something campaign. Join me so that we can put our heads together to try to figure out, you know, what kind of conferences can we pull together? What kind of clusters can we have in our spiritual environments that will help people get to a place where they can feel comfortable saying something and confident that we have the ability to help them get free from the things that they have gone through. So if you want to know why we don't speak up, I can't cover every single reason. You just have to understand that trauma affects people differently. And what we're trying to do is create a space where people can be free to talk about it, where they won't be further abused, where we won't be adding insult to injury, where we won't be throwing salt on an already open wound. We want the wounds to close. Is that all right? So the question really isn't, why didn't you say something? The question really ought to be, what can I do to help move you forward? What can I do to help you heal now? And if you're watching me, and again, you haven't said something, there'll be some resources below underneath this video that you can connect with to find a safe space where you can be liberated from your trauma, where you can talk about with somebody who is willing to listen and somebody who does care what you have experienced, whether it is sexual or not. We want to transform our traumas. Would you meet me at my website, ReinWallaceMinistriesInternational.com, where we've got some coaching availability, and we would love to begin to coach you through your process of healing. We've got the Transformation University and so many other programs that we are offering to you, because our goal is to transform trauma one person at a time, one soul at a time, nation to nation to nation. If there's something you want to share with us, please feel free to email us at transformwithrein, that's REIN, that'll be below, at gmail.com. We also want to hear your stories. Say Something is going to move from a segment of me talking to bringing others on board that have transformed their trauma and allowing you to hear those testimonies so that you will know you too can be healed, you too can be delivered, you too can be set free. I want to thank you for joining me for this brief time. Until next Say Something Saturday, I will see you then. You don't have to wait till Saturday though. Join us on Mondays for Authentic Worship and Wednesdays for Help Me Stand Wednesdays. Until next time.